Wherever you're tuning in from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. IAG Cargo has been working with a number of leading charities and to date has donated capacity to transport 125 tonnes of aid to Ukraine. One of our most recent shipments saw IAG Cargo partner with US-based Project Hope to deliver over 8 tonnes of medical aid from Boston into the region via London Heathrow. These supplies are desperately needed. And today I want to take 10 minutes to highlight the important work that Project Hope are doing. I'm delighted to have Chris Skopec, Project Hope Executive Vice President of Global Healthcare Programs, joining me for a conversation. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me, Matthew.
No, my absolute pleasure. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. What's the focus of Project Hope?
So we're an American-based NGO that focuses on health and humanitarian assistance, and we've been doing this for the last 60 years around the globe.
And the coordination of these shipments is more difficult than many realise. What goes on behind the scenes absolutely fascinates me. What are the big logistical challenges that you're facing with getting aid to the Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine presented a huge number of logistical challenges, the likes of which we had never seen, at least not all together at once in an emergency context like this. For starters, we're working with a huge country. It's 45 million people. This is a massive population. We lost access to airports from the earliest days, so we could not fly anything in. Everything had to be transported by land into the country, and that meant transiting through the European Union. That presents its own logistical challenges, especially when we're working with pharmaceuticals and other items that are going to be carefully regulated within the European Union. And so first we had to overcome that challenge. How were we getting goods to arrive into the European Union, get them cleared there, then get them into Ukraine? We worked with bonded warehouses, we worked with transit visas, and then we also had to take donations not just from within the European Union, but also outside of the European Union, within Great Britain, the US, other manufacturers around the world. Add to it the fact that Ukraine is a major manufacturing and agricultural country itself. So a huge part of the world supply chain was being impacted by the fact that they were under siege and that their factories were no longer functioning to a large degree. Some still are, fortunately, that their ag industry was being badly compromised, which only just exacerbates the need that you see on the ground. And so we all found ourselves trying to source the same kind of goods, trauma supplies in medicine, basic primary healthcare goods, hygiene supplies, items for families that are displaced. We have 8 million people displaced in Ukraine right now. And so we're all scrambling for the same goods. And this is a huge, as I said, it's a population of 45 million. We can't just purchase all of those goods out of Poland, for example, a huge country and massive supplies. But within 2 weeks' time, the Polish government saw what was going to happen, and they put strict regulations and restrictions on large-scale procurement of pharma because they can't have their whole supply chain going in to support Ukraine. They've got their own health needs to worry about, their own health system that they've got to provide for. So it was a real continuously moving target of where we're getting these critically needed supplies, how we're getting them in, and how we're getting them not just inside Ukraine, but to the most affected regions, the cities and the hospitals and the healthcare centers that desperately needed it the most.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Chris. And I guess, aid generally flows out of the EU, not necessarily into it. What sort of planning goes into a move like this?
Well, to say the least, there was a lot of building the plane as you were flying it. There's a lot of troubleshooting that needs to take place. But we have to have, a lot of things have to come together at once to make a shipment work. We can't start moving supplies until we know exactly where they're going to be going to. The paperwork that's required to get them cleared, the warehousing, the trucking. Oftentimes we have to bring different products together. So we got a very generous donation, as an example, of insulin from Eli Lilly, and yet it didn't come with the needles required for the injections. And so we had to source and find the exact matching needles for the product that we had available, have those meet simultaneously in Lviv in our warehouse before we could do onward distribution to Kharkov. And of course, all of this needs to be done with a very secure cold chain in place to ensure that the insulin is still of good quality by the time it reaches the hospitals in need. So it's a massive operation that starts at the source of the goods and through the different stopping points, as you mentioned, with the IAG cargo that we worked with. It went from Boston to London, onwards to Warsaw, from Warsaw then to the border, Poland into Lviv, and from there onwards to Eastern Ukraine. We have to have all of that mapped out before we can start moving the first bit of supplies. And so it is a huge amount of coordination and planning that takes place with every shipment.
Yeah, and as you sort of touched on there, a huge variety of what you're actually shipping. I mean, if we look at the recent shipment that we partnered on, that flight in from Boston, can you talk us through the aid that was on board that flight?
Yeah, so a lot of highly needed products. We were so glad to be able to get that in as quickly as we did. Trauma supplies, first and foremost. That's been in huge demand, whether it's gauze, needles, painkillers, antibiotics, everything related to immediate trauma care. Sutures, been in incredibly short supply and in huge demand. Everyone is trying to get these. So those were in large quantities on that shipment. We also had hygiene kits that are critical for the huge number of displaced families that are there, that are in the West primarily now, living in congregate settings, sometimes living in makeshift shelters. So be able to try to mitigate the concern around outbreak of other diseases and waterborne diseases, make sure that people have access to proper hygiene. And also baby kits, kits for newborn babies that have onesies and wet wipes and other critically needed products that people simply can't access to because the supply chain has been so badly damaged inside Ukraine.
And I mean, you've obviously got a lot of experience and expertise in this space. From an aid perspective, how does the situation in Ukraine compare with other humanitarian crises where Project Hope has been involved?
Yeah, so we've been involved in every major humanitarian crisis over the last 50 years. It's part and parcel of who we are and what we do. This one was unique in a number of different ways. Firstly, the scale is hard to understate. Again, a population of 45 million. That's more than twice the size of the population of Syria, another country devastated by war with massive amounts of internal displacement and refugees. It's maybe the most comparable in recent history, and yet the scale is considerably larger. We saw 4.5 million people, upwards of 5 million people fled the country within the first 5 weeks. When I was there, it was 150 to 200,000 newly arriving refugees in the adjacent countries every single day. So that scale and the speed with which it took place was extremely difficult for us to keep up with. Add to it, as I said, Ukraine is a major manufacturing country and has a huge pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. When that's compromised, then we have to find completely new avenues of commodities and supplies to be able to access to get in. And that kind of stock simply doesn't exist around the world. That's that huge amount of goods in warehouses, even though we've got great warehouses around the world with supplies of medical kits and trauma kits and others just for the hurricane, just for the earthquake, just for that huge natural disaster to get in place immediately. Nothing was ready for the kind of scale that we faced and the demand that we were facing at this time. So I would say, just more than anything else, the scale that it took place and the speed with which it all evolved was in a lot of ways unprecedented.
Yeah. And, and when you look at the scale and speed that humanitarian crises can occur, in your view, what is the role of air cargo in supplying aid? Not just in this mission, but other humanitarian missions as well.
Well, it's critical. I mean, nothing compares. Trucking will only get you so far. With Ukraine, we were able to send trucks from around the European Union, Netherlands, even from London, we were able to send some. But we're not going to meet all of that demand with product that is within trucking distance, quite frankly. Sea cargo doesn't make sense in an emergency setting. I was in the hospitals in Ukraine myself, and when you're hearing doctors pleading desperately for additional supplies because they are simply out, and I'm asking them, do you need more doctors and nurses to volunteer? We can bring some in. They said, what are they going to do, Chris? We have nothing for them to work with. We need supplies before we need anything else. The idea of putting something on a cargo ship and waiting 3 months is not really a solution. And that's where the air transport comes in. It's hugely expensive, but it's critically needed, and nothing else is going to meet that demand in the time that you need it, other than air cargo.
Yeah, no. I mean, air cargo capacity, it is critical to moving supplies quickly. And our industry has always played a key role in providing, rapid responses to humanitarian crises. Well, I mean, thank you, Chris. It's really been interesting to hear more about it, hear the work that Project Hope are doing. Before I let you go, though, what can our listeners, what are people who are listening in right now do to support the vital work that Project Hope is doing?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think as this discussion has highlighted, it's a team effort. We all have to come together and be able to provide the kind of assistance and support that we can. The cargo space that IAG has made available to us was hugely essential in getting those goods into Ukraine to the places that needed it when they needed it. All of these things cost money. We've got a huge logistics team working to coordinate this, make it happen. We are getting doctors and nurses on the ground to provide that kind of surge support. Cash donations are really critical to helping us access and tap into all of these resources and really maximize our capacity as an experienced international NGO working in a disaster response, to mobilize the resources that we have and to make the most of the kind of partnerships that we have with IAG Cargo. So if the listeners want to go to projecthope.org and go to the How to Help page, you can find ways to contribute and make a donation.
Super. So that's projecthope.org.
That's correct.
I personally, I'm proud to work for a company that has been able to contribute support to Ukraine. And it means something that at IAG Cargo we've been able to use our global network and capacity to support aid, to Ukraine and to support you guys on the great work that you've been doing. So thank you again, Chris, for joining us. And from all of us here at IAG Cargo, wishing you and your teams on the ground a good tomorrow.
Excellent. A huge shout out of gratitude from our teams in Ukraine to the support that we've gotten from IAG Cargo, and of course from the doctors, the nurses, the hospital administrators who we're working directly with. So grateful for that effort. Let's keep it up. A lot of work yet to do.
Cool. Great speaking to you, Chris.
All right. Take care.
Okay.